I said earlier on that Maundy Thursday is the time that we remember the Last Supper, the Passover. And I'm going to read a few verses that are words of God to Moses. And they come from Exodus chapter 5, and I'm going to read the last few verses and then on into chapter 6. And they relate greatly to the Passover in ways that I'll explain in a minute. And it's headed up in my Bible, God promises deliverance. And we need to remember that God is speaking these words to a people who are slaves and have been slaves for generations and generations. I think a bit further on it refers to 400 years. It's a long time that this nation has been in slavery. So I'm reading from the end of chapter 5 in Exodus. Moses returned to the Lord and said, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country." God also said to Moses, "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as God Almighty. But by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I've remembered my covenant. Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord." So God is speaking to Moses, and only 3 chapters earlier, I don't know how long that is in terms of time, only 3 chapters earlier, God had met Moses at the burning bush. And he had revealed himself as I am. And he had told Moses at the burning bush that he'd heard the cry of the people in slavery to be set free. And he said to Moses, if you remember the story, so I'm going to send you to Pharaoh. And Moses said, "Oh, not me. Can you send someone else, please?" And God said to Moses, "No, I want you to go. I want you to do it." And there had been various things that he got Moses to do to prove that he could work through Moses to speak to Pharaoh. We must not forget, of course, that Pharaoh was the man who brought him up. Pharaoh was his father, or stood instead of his father. And Moses goes back to Egypt. He finds Pharaoh, his father, and he says, God says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said no. And he got the slave masters to work the slaves harder. And then, of course, the people are saying, what just happened there then? And Moses is saying to God, what are you doing? You've told me you're going to free your people. And I went to Pharaoh like you asked me to. And now look what you've done. You've made their lives harder, not easier. You haven't rescued them in any way. They are just struggling more. And it's at that point that God says to Moses these 4 promises of deliverance, of rescue, of freedom. And I wonder if you've come here today because you are looking for freedom in some way. Are you looking for rescue in some way from something? Do you need to be set free in some way? And the 4 expressions of rescuing, redemption that Moses received from God were these: I will bring you out, I will deliver you, I will redeem you, and you will be my people, and I will be your God. They're powerful promises, aren't they? Powerful promises. Promises of rescue to a people whose lives are made harder than ever, who are struggling in their slavery. So what has this to do with the Passover? Well, these promises underpin part of the ceremony of the Passover. The Passover takes, it's actually several days as a festival, but the meal of the Passover, have you ever been to a Passover meal, a Seder meal? It takes quite a long time, doesn't it? And through that meal you eat certain things, certain scriptures are read, and the story of deliverance of the people is told in various ways. And throughout the meal, there are 4 cups of wine that are drunk at various stages. That's what happens through the Passover meal. And what you may not know is that these 4 promises are each represented by a cup during the Passover feast. In fact, the Jewish Passover's just finished. I think it finished last week. And they will have done this the same way down through the ages, in the same way that it happened in the first place. Hasn't happened yet for these people, but these are the foundational promises that were written into the ceremony of remembrance, because that's basically what it is. So the 4 cups. The first cup that is drunk during the Passover meal represents, it's called the cup of sanctification. It is the cup that promises the people will be set free from their slavery. They're working harder than ever at the moment, but God says they will be set free. I will free them. And the promise to free them is so that they can worship him. That's why they are to be set free, so that they can worship him. And each time Moses goes to Pharaoh, God says, set my people free so that they can worship me. It's all about their return to God. In slavery, they have not been able to worship their God. So this cup of sanctification, the setting apart, that's what sanctification means, consecrating, is so that we can worship him and do the work he gives us to do. So that was the first cup of the Passover, the cup of sanctification that relates to that promise, I will set you free. The second cup is the cup of deliverance, which was drunk a little bit later on in the meal. I will free you. I will deliver you. Sounds like the same thing, doesn't it? Not quite the same thing. It's not quite the same thing. This second cup speaks of God doing for his people what they cannot do for themselves. They cannot set themselves free from being slaves to Pharaoh. It's impossible. They can't do it. They have to rely on God to do it for them. And there are probably things in our lives that we're desperate to be set free from. But we can't do it for ourselves. We need God, his sovereign work, to be done in our lives so that we can be free, we can be delivered. So the people can't rescue themselves, they need to be rescued by God. And that's what the second cup means. The deliverer, the emphasis on the deliverer. Cup 3 is the cup of redemption, later on in the Passover meal. And I love this phrase, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty judgments. An outstretched arm or hand for the Israelite people meant power. The symbolism of an outstretched arm, an outstretched hand, was power. And when it was both arm and hand, it was mighty power. So God is saying, I'm going to use mighty power to do this work for you. And of course, there is in the cup of redemption the sense that a ransom needed to be paid. When you redeem something, you pay for its release, don't you? When I was a little girl, I used to love licking the Green Shield stamps from the co-op that my grandma collected, and I had the job of sticking them in her book. And then, of course, she would redeem them by taking them to the shop and getting some, I don't know, toaster or something. And that was my job. And that's the redemption. That is the paying back to release something. It also reminds me of the cross, the outstretched arm. They wouldn't have known that then, would they? That was a long, long time in the future. The release of the Hebrew nation was going to be at a cost. And of course, our own release and freedom came at a cost, didn't it? And then the final cup, the cup of hope, the adoption of the nation as the family, the children of God, and the promise of God that he would be their God for their nation. So we have these 4 cups that speak of these 4 promises as to how this nation is going to be rescued and set free. When we read the account of the Last Supper, particularly in Luke, have you ever noticed that the Last Supper account starts with Jesus took the cup and gave thanks and gave it? And then it goes on a bit, and then it says, and he took the bread and gave thanks, and he took the cup and gave thanks. Have you ever noticed that? Luke's first cup in his account is the second cup of the Passover. It's the second cup, the cup of deliverance. And it's at this point, I think, probably that Jesus departs from the script of the Passover, which would have been handed down for generations, because when he gets to the third cup, the cup of redemption, the cup that symbolized the lamb The lamb's blood that was shed, you remember, that was painted over the doorposts, the lintels, so that the shadow of death would pass over the houses of the Israelite people and would only affect the Egyptians, the last of the plagues that actually allowed them then to be released. The blood that was painted over to keep them safe. And Jesus says, it's my blood. Not the blood of a lamb, my blood. Can you imagine what the disciples around that table must have thought at that moment? Their minds must have been reeling, mustn't it, from the impact of what he said. My blood is the cup of redemption for you. So when we share communion together, when you next share communion, remember that those cups are linked to a promise. And that cup that Jesus said, this is my blood, is the promise of a redeemer, of a deliverer. I remember going to see Jesus Christ Superstar when it was on at one of the theatres in London. I forget which one now. But there, whether you like it or loathe it, I think it's probably a bit like Marmite, but there was a very, very powerful moment, and I think it probably was an accident, not supposed to happen. But for those who had got eyes to see, it was so powerful, because there is a moment when the disciples are getting ready for their Last Supper, and they're singing a song that's something about, I've always wanted to be an apostle, kind of, Lord, can I be an apostle? Can I be an apostle? Something like that. And they're setting the cups out, and they share the Last Supper, and something happens, and the cup got knocked over. And there was a white cloth on the table, and suddenly there was clearly something in the cup, because there was this big red stain. And it was such a powerful moment that actually there was something in the cup, and there was the blood shed. I don't think it was supposed to happen, but gosh, the symbolism of that moment. And so here we are, all these years, decades, centuries later, still remembering these promises in a slightly different way. The ransom that was paid for us by Jesus, as we will remember tomorrow. I wonder which of these promises you need today. Do you need to be set free? Do you need to be rescued in some way? Do you need God to do something for you that you cannot do for yourself? Or do you need to be reminded of the hope that God has through the death of Jesus for you?